I'm your host for the session, Swati Chikran from IMAI. I welcome you all once again to the panel discussion on Consumer Protection Innovation Balancing Act. We would like to begin by thanking you all for being a part of Pursuit 2021, combating financial frauds with technology, supported by Invest India and Startup India. We would like to thank our partners. Our session partner, Refinitiv, Gold partners, Rekita, Netherlands Embassy, and Cybersprint, Bronze partner, Onfido, and Knowledge partner, ENY. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Ms. Akanksha Sinha, Investment Specialist, Invest India, who would be moderating the session today. Joining us today, we have a distinguished set of leaders. Please welcome Mr. Vimal Saboo, Chief Business Officer, Early Salary, Mr. Shankar Palaniandy, Founder and CEO, FRS Labs, Mr. Kedar Kulkarni, the co-founder and CEO, Hyperverge, Mr. Tushar Shankar, the co-founder, Fee Commerce. I would request all the delegates to please keep on putting their questions at the chat box. The panel may pick up a few at the end and answer to you, right? Over to you, Ms. Sinha.
Thank you so much, Swati. Good afternoon, everyone. Minutes or so, I will attempt to unpack a long-standing debate with time immemorial. The question of how much progress is too much progress. Or to better phrase it for our discussion today, is there a trade-off between the accelerating pace of innovation in the fintech space and the corresponding consumer protection measures which ought to be put in place? And if such a trade-off does actually exist, then what exactly is the price that we as consumers are paying for it? So I hope to ask all of these pressing questions and more to our esteemed panel present with us. We are fortunate to have some leading experts from the fintech industry. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment to walk us through the format of the session. We will be addressing three themes, followed by concluding remarks by the panel and some question and answers. So the first theme that we want to address today is on the need for consumer protection. Here we will talk about how our panelists approach and define consumer protection given their respective backgrounds, along with how high they place it in the priorities ladder of their business offerings. So my first question is to Mr. Vimal. So how would you define consumer protection in the context of your company, Early Salary? And what are some proactive measures taken by you to ensure the same? Over to you,
Yeah,
Mr. Vimal.
yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Akanksha, for the question. So I think the consumer protection is a very wide subject and can be talked in different, in different ways. But what I believe consumer protection is, as long as we give the full, adequate, and full information to the customers, and we also give right the choices to make to the consumer, and that's what I call it as a consumer protection at the very, as the definition. We at Early Salary offers credits to a lot of unserved credit consumers, and because innovation is one of the things which fintechs have been doing, and it is because of the newer ways of credit underwriting what we are doing, and for that we need a few permissions from the consumer, so that's what we do as of now. But from the what we do to protect the data of the consumer and the right of the consumer is primarily, we store the data in a very encrypted format, and data access is not available to unauthorized people, and we do also take the and one of the things I think, so the consumer protection is a prime focus for all the fintechs, and specifically for us because we are in a lending industry. So that's what we do. Lastly, as a lender, I think so we have to recover money back, and while we collecting the money back, we make sure that we use the proper collection practices as prescribed by the RBI. So we do definitely take consumer protection as a very, very prime focus for us.
Thank you so much for the response, Mr. Weber. That actually brings us to our next question, addressed to you, Mr. Kedar. So you have experience crafting bespoke AI-based solutions for companies across the spectrum of financial services, telecom, energy, security, defense, etc. So how do you work in elements of consumer protection in your solutions?
Yeah. So quick intro of Hyperverge. Hyperverge helps large organizations such as SBI, Jio, Vodafone, and so many consumer lenders, digital lenders, brokerages, etc. onboard their customers. We help them reduce fraud, and and the numbers that I'm talking about is 410 million customers that have been processed. So it's like 5% of the planet's population went through the system. So when you are dealing at that scale, I think the question that you asked is very important, because we are dealing with very important data. This is all personally identifiable information of each and every one of those people who decided to go through it. Akanksha, the most important thing I feel is, what is the vision or the product vision of the company? So in our product vision, we wanted it to center around trust, right? Whatever we are doing today, be it for SBI or be it for anyone, we are finally helping a financial transaction go through. And trust is a very important part of that. And when we talk about trust, usually we always look at it from an organization perspective. How can I reduce my fraud? How can I reduce people coming with fake identities and all of that? But I think there is equal amount of importance that is needed on the consumer side of trust, right? How are we creating the same amount of safety for a consumer who is giving that data out? Now, to talk about the actual action points, there are design principles that can actually make this a reality. It's good to have a vision, but what are the design principles that make it a reality? At an organization level, we have certain policies. All our APIs are stateless, which means they don't store any information. We have a no storage policy across the organization. So we don't want any person's data to be with us, because we see ourselves as a AI technology provider, right? We are not a data host or anything like that. Lot of things can be done at the device level, right? Where you don't even need to go to the cloud, or the data doesn't need to go to the cloud, right? You can do those checks at the device level. And most importantly, I think today, and as we see moving forward, the networks that we talk about, we are moving from a centralized storage system. If you see our bureaus and everything, it's all centralized data storage, to a decentralized consent based storage system, right? Where everything is decentralized and the consumer has consent in terms of, should I allow someone to use my data? If yes or no, for how much time and for what purpose, right? So I feel that these design principles make this vision into sort of a reality. And obviously all the other things, right? Encryption, the way we store data, where we store data, I think best practices around all of that are things that we follow. But I think the thing that makes the biggest difference, 80-20 difference sort of, is the product vision, that how can we make this transaction safer for the consumer also.
Thank you so much for those insights, Mr. Kedar. I really like your point about building trust with the consumer, and that actually connects with the next question that I have for Mr. Tushar. So, sir, along with consumer protection, how important do you think is awareness in an average consumer of these consumer protection measures? And what are some steps undertaken by your company, Fi Commerce, to enhance this awareness?
Thanks, Akanksha, and good afternoon to everybody who's on the call and on the panel. We are from in the financial transaction domain, which is a highly regulated domain. And within this, we do a lot of innovations where the innovations are largely centered on how I make the transaction or payment So, for example, with COVID coming in, we launched the contactless payments for consumers. So, if a consumer has ordered goods that are reaching his house and he's going to pay after delivery, how do I make the whole process contactless for him? And that's and so needless to say, we have data. Which is the personal data as well. And we need to operate in the regulations that are provided by the central bank of the country and the networks like Visa, MasterCard, and NPCI. So in terms of awareness of consumer about his data, I would say it is not up to the mark at this point of Like I said, that personal data and financial related data, and hence it is of great importance for the consumer to understand how his or her data is being protected. And the very fact that we see so many frauds in the industry that are happening on the cards that are getting misused, of the consumer of how to protect his data and how to use data whenever he's going on a website or making a payment. So what we do is we put up on our website as to how do I protect the data. First of all, what is the information or data that we are collecting? What is how we think of data? What are the certifications we have done? We put this up completely on the website so the consumer can come and read and be knowledgeable about it. In parallel, we also work with banks and other customers where we do social media posts as to how should a consumer protect his data.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tushar. Yeah, I believe social media is a great way to reach out to consumers to increase their consciousness on steps taken for their own privacy and safety. When we're talking about general gold standards that the industry follows, my last question of this theme comes to Mr. Shankar. Sir, could you shed some light on some industry gold standards on consumer protection and why you think they may be essential to be adopted by all businesses?
Good afternoon, all. I'm not sure there is a single gold standard, but I think there are some basic principles or best practices that each businesses can follow that we ourselves follow um, as a company. But these are more sort of towards regulated industries. So something like what the other two gentlemen spoke about. So there's more for them because we are a tech layer providing the services to large banks, insurers, and telcos. But so these sort of five principles that I'm going to sort of outline sort of broadly aligns with what they must be doing to protect our information. The one is, and these are already laid out by the regulators, so it's just probably a repetition of that. So fair treatment of customers, I think that's sort of the beginning of this gold standard. I think businesses need you. I think they're sometimes desperate, but I think the problem is that they make it sort of quite difficult for you to sort of obtain that service in the name of regulation and consumer protection. I think you only have to sort of get an insurance policy or apply for an insurance claim, and you'll sort of realize how difficult it is because they sort of treat you with suspicion straight away. And the amount of documentation and paperwork that you'll have to sort of satisfy in order to prove yourself is sort of extremely difficult and go against that fair treatment sort of principle. Second one is transparency. I think Tushar spoke about that all information has to be sort of published on the website. So I think that's great. So I think another thing is, if you're sort of verifying people, it's sort of good to sort of upfront inform the customer that why you need that verification done and what documents you're going to collect. So proof of ID, proof of address, photograph, and so on. And exactly what you're going to do with it. It's not good to actually say that we're going to verify you and then we're going to share this information with some kind of a digital marketing agency, and then you sort of agree to it. So being transparent is sort of a great way to sort of build that trust, and then clear with your products and its suitability. I think this is we haven't sort of we're sort of nowhere near this in the spectrum of what we're doing, at least in the banking, insurance, telco space. I think there's even a joke that sort of going around even before COVID is that you will have to wear a mask and carry an oxygen tank just so you can recover when you come back from a bank because you were sold an extra credit card that you really didn't need. So I think being very clear and not pushing down the throat of what something that doesn't, a customer don't need is also a good principle to follow. And then the last couple of things are like sort of fairly, I think everyone would agree, taking security and privacy extremely seriously. I think most people trust the banks in terms of security, but I don't think anyone would actually trust them with privacy. And because you never know what the banks are going to do once they collect the information, pass it on to digital agencies, and then you're sort of inundated with calls following that. And then finally, is just responding to complaints and grievances. I think it's quite difficult that when you have a statement which is wrong, and then you sort of want to call back and make a complaint, you're not taken seriously at all. So those are broadly the five principles, and I think if every business can adapt and improve on this, I think it will be a better place for consumers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shankar, for those insights. We have very nicely summed it up in 5 key points that businesses need to take care of. So that brings us to the end of our first theme, which was addressing the need for consumer product protection. And I believe we have arrived on a consensus that building trust as a two-way street from consumers on the service providers and service providers on consumers to provide authentic information is essential in developing good practices when it comes to consumer protection. So now we're going to move on to the second theme, which is actually going to bell the cat. It is the crux of what we want to discuss today. The second theme revolves around innovation versus consumer protection. Is there a balancing act in the mix? So this thematic area will address the direction in which innovation in the fintech industry is headed. And we also want to understand whether there is actually a trade-off between consumer protection and innovation, which is inevitable when we're moving on in the road to progress in the fintech industry. So my first question in this theme goes to you, Mr. Kedar. So the role of AI in solving business problems has been a disruption of the scale never seen before. And as new use cases for AI are unlocked, do you see negative repercussions for consumer privacy in our future?
Yeah. So our company's theme is tomorrow's AI delivered today. So I'll always talk about the positive parts of AI before we get into the concern areas. The positive part of AI is you can go through massive amount of data. Like you can go through hundreds of millions of images, voice notes, so many things that humanly is not possible. It would take human beings maybe 6 months to do something that an AI engine can do in an hour, right? And I think that's where the power of AI comes from, that it can go through massive amount of data, and today it can go through it fairly accurately. Now, you mentioned about the negative parts of this, right? So each tool that we have seen, right, or each technology leap that we have seen, be it nuclear power, be it space tech, be it anything, it all depends on who uses it and how they use it, right? And then we also have a collective responsibility on what's guarding rails should we sort of set up so that everyone, at least a whole lot of people use it in the right way. My feeling is one of the concerns that I want to draw attention to is the guarding rail of equal opportunity for all, right? While AI can do hundreds of millions of data points, there is a huge concern that it can lead to biases, right? Because what is happening inside that AI engine, the mathematics of it, no one can see, right? So it can, what is the problem, right? If I have to give an example, it can so happen that we have a credit decisioning system, or in our case, when we process so many large number of identities, right? India, for example, we actually face this problem, right? In Punjab, where people were wearing turbans, suddenly the process, there are maybe a lot more rejections that happen if you don't work on the AI engine, because it's not usual form of data, right? Like you don't see usually in the world people wearing turban or something that would be an equivalent in the world when you do the training data set. We also come into a place where India is a land where we have different colors, we have different devices. We will see someone having an iPhone and someone having a $50 or a $30 phone. We see bandwidth differences, right, in such a big way. Like someone would be on a 4G and someone is still using a 2G. How do we ensure that whatever we build as technology still provides equal opportunity to everyone, right? They could be wearing something different, they could be using a different device, they could be on different bandwidths, they could be in a city or in a tier 3 where where situations are different. I think this is a big area of concern because, like we mentioned about the theme trust and safety for the consumer, See, these are things that consumers cannot even be aware about. Like everyone can be at least aware about my data being with someone and they misusing it. But if there is a bias in the system itself, right? Like my loan gets rejected, not because I am not credit worthy and all, but because my photo wasn't a good resolution photo, right? This is something that are the next generation problems, and some problems that we are now starting to see. So each stakeholder has the responsibility to ensure. I feel that no bias comes in, because bias is a huge form of discrimination, and I think our consumers have to be protected against it. So that's my viewpoint from AI and technology. If we can be proactive about bias, we are taking the step to protect our consumer. It's one step out of many to protect our consumers.
Well, we are counting on AI to resolve our own personal prejudices and biases and any other systemic level issues that we as humans were not able to solve earlier. So thank you so much for those insights, Mr. Kedar. This brings me to the next question addressed to Mr. Shankar. So with increasing innovation in the fintech industry over the last couple of years, how have you seen consumer protection measures evolve? Have they become more stringent?
Yes, I think they've become more stringent. I think we can divide this into maybe two segments. So prior to the Supreme Court verdict, um, I think we were on a digital superhighway, so to speak. I think even the Western world was like really in awe of the speeds in which we were sort of verifying and onboarding users using Aadhaar. I think much of our technology that we developed prior to Aadhaar, our OCR technology, ID verification, were like sort of thrown out by banks because Aadhaar was the de facto sort of onboarding tool and sort of verifying users. I think following that is what we really saw a transformation of because Aadhaar is sort of not cannot be used by sort of private companies. But prior to that, if you see, it was like sort of fairly easy for us to sort of piggyback onto an Aadhaar stack and then provide that service to companies like Early Salary, for example, uh, and, and that would be it. But now it's sort of very different in terms of uh, so how we deal with Aadhaar in particular. I think the highest court felt that it would eventually lead to some kind of profiling, tracking, targeted advertising. I think fairly so. I think more. I think important thing in that verdict was this was all done without the consent of the user. So verifying users with Aadhaar was all like fairly good, easy, simple. Customer was happy, the user was happy, the consumer was happy. But then eventually, what happens after that sort of really played out by this civil liberty arguments at the highest court. I think following on from that, so this was a good step that the restrictions around Aadhaar and how it can be used. Even the Aadhaar numbers has to be masked. So there's a lot of regulations around how Aadhaar should be accepted, stored, preserved, used, and so on. I think Try has also done some really good work. So it wasn't sort of very difficult for you to sort of do digital marketing, send out large SMSs and so on without being registered or being anonymous, really. But they've come really hard on you to make yourself as a registered business, and then every transaction that you play out is all sort of carefully monitored now. So, which is actually a good step, a good move by Try. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of e-commerce payments, in particularly UPI payments, to protect consumers from fraud. I don't think there is a single gold standard that the industry or the regulators come up in terms of protecting consumers there. I think perhaps in that stage, in that particular sort of industry scenario, I think we're probably about 10, 15 years as to where credit cards were. So my view is that it'll sort of get slightly bad before it gets better.
That was a good reality for us. Good to know that in some areas, consumer protection is following innovation very proactively rather than being reactive. But yes, there are areas wherein we have to catch up. That brings us to my next question to Mr. Vimal, which is the crux of the matter, sir. Do you believe there is a trade-off with increasing innovation in the fintech space and better consumer protection, or can they be considered mutually exclusive?
So see, the innovation is always good from the consumer side, because whenever there is an innovation, consumer generally gets benefited either by getting the good experience or good services, or the basically he has a lot of choices to make, right? So the innovation is always good. Now, specifically in fintech industry, I believe like in last 5 years or so, a lot of innovation has happened, and those innovations have been pretty good, extremely useful for the end consumers. Like just to name in the lending industry, in unsecured loans, if you really see, no traditional lenders before the fintech came in were offering the loans to many consumers who generally used to work in the companies, smaller companies. They like all the lenders used to say that you have to work in a category of companies to avail the loan from them. So that these were the kind of biasness which were always there as a part of lending industry. But since in last 5 years, I think there has been a lot of innovations which has given a lot of choices to the consumers, and there are many such examples where I think so traditional lenders you never used to offer the credits to a certain segment of customers, but because of the fintech, I think so these lending those customers have started getting the credits from the organized players like us. So I would personally feel there is no trade-off, because as long as customer has the full informations and he has the choices to make before buying a product or services, I'm sure consumers rights can be protected. And at the same time, I feel innovation at a in long run cannot happen at the cost of consumer rights or consumer protections. In short run they may be there, but then in long run, if the businesses have to be sustained, innovations have to be in conjunction with consumer rights and protection. So I feel they are mutually exclusive, and I don't think so one has to happen over the other, because in long run, I personally feel the innovation cannot uh, last long if the consumer rights are not protected well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vimal. Very nicely the last question. I'm glad you brought up the last point about the your long-term insight on how consumer protection and innovation are actually going to go hand in hand. So this very nicely ties up to the last question that I have here for Mr. Tushar. Sir, do you believe stringent consumer protection measures can actually hinder innovation in the fintech industry? And do industry leaders today prioritize consumer protection measures enough to give them this power?
Okay. See, on the contrary,
Mr.
what I
Tushar,
believe that any. Can you hear me?
yes, sir, now you're on.
See, on the contrary, what I believe is any innovation which needs to be market ready has of multiple factors of the advantage that it is getting in the market for a unsolved need that was there in the market, and more importantly, how is the consumer's data getting protected. Any innovation, I believe, which risks a consumer to frauds is not an innovation that is market ready. It needs to run risk. For example, see, if you see in India, about 15% of transactions, overall transactions in the country are digital. So there is a huge scope for innovation to get the balance transactions which are non-digital onto the digital bandwagon. An example that I can quote is, for example, there are digitally balanced people there to transact digitally, and that is where deployed Aadhaar Pay like instruments where the consumer can scan his thumbprint and make a payment for anything that he's purchasing against from a merchant. And this became hugely popular in the interiors where consumers were not very digital. That's a clear, it is where a consumer orders his goods and has a cash on delivery, but makes a payment which is digital upon the doorstep. There were huge challenges there with respect to network and how do we solve that whole problem. But we innovated, but at the same time, it all the guidelines card transaction needs to follow. So I personally believe that if an innovation takes care of data privacy and does not put the consumer at risk is where it becomes completely market ready. And a good example what we have is the government has put up the 3 boxes, then fight to go live or be launched into the market. So in my opinion, if there is an innovation and it is not complying to regulatory standards, the innovation should not change, but the solution should be tweaked to carry the same innovation into the market.
That is a very, very heartening conclusion to this segment and to this very bleak statement that we started off with. And I'm very happy to learn that. That actually brings us to the last theme of our discussion. Obviously, this is the elephant in the room that we have to discuss. No conversation about the future is complete without discussing the current pandemic that is going on. So, the last segment will address consumer protection in times of global crisis. So you all will be asked to comment on the far-reaching impact of the COVID-19 crisis on consumer protection in this segment. And with businesses increasingly going the digitization route, should we expect compromises with consumer protection? Are there enough checks and balances in the Indian system to prevent this from happening? So with that very happy thought, my first question is to you, Mr. Shankar. Give us your take on the current data protection and privacy laws in India. How well is the Indian consumer protection framework equipped to withstand the new challenges due to COVID-19? Mr. Shankar, could you hear me? I hope I'm
There was a little bit of a lag, but I hope you're able to hear me.
We can hear you now, sir. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes, Akanksha, I'm able to hear you now. I hope the others are able to hear me. So I got your question. Yeah, there's a little bit of a network issue, but I hope everybody on the call is able to hear me. So I'll sort of carry on. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah, sure.
I think I think you should just sort of follow your question again. So there's this Consumer Protection Act of 2019. We sort of replaced the aging 1989 Act. And then we have this data protection bill, which has been hanging around for quite a while. I don't know if any of you are sort of following very closely. It was introduced in December 2019. There's been about 6 to 6 committee meetings that have happened. So practically every week they've been meeting from early January 2020. And then it's coming up again for debate in the monsoon session. So we'll have to see how that sort of plays out. It's pretty much like GDPR. I mean, if you consider that as sort of the gold standard, there are some very stringent rules and sort of non-compliance by businesses, all businesses really, and not just for regulated entities, but so every business will have to sort of comply or invite sort of very hefty fines. And if you read the act, there are no carrots here. I mean, it's just really stick. You do this, and if you don't, you're going to get punished. There's nothing like, there's incentives for people to do. It's just really that, if you just go against protecting consumers, protecting consumer data, then you're going to be punished very heavily. So essentially, I mean, if you break it down, it's sort of mandating businesses to take user consent. I think that's what's been lacking, as to inform them, what data has been collected, how it's used, and who shared with, and so on. But if you look one step, if you sort of drill down into it, most businesses, banks, insurance, telecoms, and large businesses at least, they're already following this. It's laid out in their terms and conditions, privacy policies. It's very clear as to how your data is collected and is going to be used and so on. But the problem there is you cannot withdraw your consent. You cannot go back and say just delete all my data. I think this is what the privacy laws are addressing now. That once you share information, you can go back and you have the power to withdraw that information, or you can ask businesses to completely erase it. Because if it was used for, let's say, verifying your identity, it's not used anymore. It has to be erased from your database. I think if this is played out exactly the way the data protection bill is asking businesses to follow, this is quite difficult because this would require sweeping changes to all technologies that we've been using now. And it would also be difficult for consumers to sort of navigate because businesses, in the name of compliance, would make it sort of more and more difficult for consumers to understand and follow. And then, so even for consumers, I mean, let's say if somebody has booked a movie ticket in an app and they want to sort of go back and erase it, they really wouldn't bother. So I think we're going in the right direction. So we'll just have to sort of wait and see how it sort of plays out for Indian consumers.
I totally understand, Mr. Shankar. Obviously, there are a lot of ifs and buts, but good to know that overall we're going in the right direction. We're formulating enough protection measures to withstand any black swan events such as COVID-19. That actually brings me to my next question addressed to you, Mr. Vimal. So how do you think the consumer protection regulation system in India compares with global best practices? Are there any pandemic-related good measures being implemented by other countries which you think will work well for India?
Yeah, I think so. As Mr. Shankar explained, is that India has got to catch up a lot in terms of consumer protection as compared to global peers. But at the same time, I don't want to take away the lot of initiative taken in last 3 to 5 years from the government and regulator side in terms of bringing the Consumer Protection Act of 2019, data privacy law, which has been going on for quite some time discussion, but I'm sure it will come in soon, pretty soon. Even I personally feel even the CCI, which is the Competition Commission of India, in a way helps consumer protection in terms of price rigging, right? Because that's also one of the way to protect the consumer. So I feel personally that the India is on right path, and we should see in next 6 to 12 months, or maybe probably 1 year to 2 years, we should be I'm going to say pretty close to the GDPR laws, which are gold standard for the consumer protection. And during the pandemic time, I'm sure even every government of almost every country has shown concerns to protecting the consumer interest against in different forms, right? Which could be exploitation in terms of price rigging, distribution control, and fixing standard for manufacturing. A lot of lot of countries have brought those kind of laws during the pandemic time to make sure that the consumers' rights are protected in a way. And I feel that that's what I think so government in India is also doing. So I personally feel in during these times, pandemic times, even though the companies have become more sympathetic towards the consumers, and specifically in lending industry, by providing many, or even the regulators have become very by providing them moratorium, giving them interest benefit. So these definitely have been done by our regulators and the government. So I feel they're pretty good from the consumer rights protection perspective. So I personally feel that the India is doing a lot, and although it has to do catch up in terms of the global peers, but I think so next 1 to 2 years, my personal belief is that we should be equivalent to a GDPR kind of gold standard.
That is good news for us as and for the industry as well. So now we're going to take a little bit of a step back, and I have a macro level question on the fintech industry for you, Mr. Tushar. So the pandemic has caused an unprecedented increase in digitization of businesses, and do you think this has led to businesses compromising on consumer privacy? Just your general view on it.
The transactions were that it has tried to increase and get the consumer to transact digitally. So the areas where businesses are working in is because see, there is already a digital infrastructure available, which needs to be extended to businesses that were not digital. Hand you over a menu card. Now that exact menu card is now available on a QR, where you have to scan the menu card and order your food, and then you get onto the digital rails to make payments. So the innovations that really are happening is how to extend the whole digital. A lot of innovation is happening. There could be cases where the innovation or ease of use takes precedence over consumer data protection. However, there are checks and balances in place uh, by these businesses. And the regulators are very high and are taken care of during during the transaction that is happening. But yes, it's going to be a challenge to because it's the speed of innovation that you need to get in to enable these businesses to go digital, and that's where come like us when regulations that are there in place and then extend the offering to businesses to enable them to get their consumers transact digitally.
Fair point, Mr. Tushar. Thank you so much for your insights. That brings us almost to the close of this particular theme. The final question is my attempt to end things on a good note because I am a bit of an AI optimist myself. So the question is addressed to you, Mr. Kedar. Could you walk us through some positive changes in consumer protection norms in the wake of the current pandemic, with special focus on norms leveraging AI?
Right. So as everyone pointed out, we have a lot of right steps in the direction of consumer protection that are going on, a lot of right steps in the direction of privacy. Uh, Apart from policy, I always had design changes that are happening, right? Like how are these things translating into design changes with respect to the new systems that are being born in this time? So we have very good stories. One of these stories is the story of DigiYatra, for example. Now, because of pandemic, we all used to carry our boarding passes, identity cards, and I think all of us would have taken one flight at least during the pandemic. And we know the hassle, right? You are wearing all sorts of things, and every time I give my ID card to someone, I have to, when I take it back, I am thinking which pocket should I keep it in. I should keep it in a pocket where there is nothing else because what if it gets infected, etc. So all of this is going on in the minds of maybe lakhs and lakhs of customers or consumers who are traveling right now. And the new Digi Yatra, I think it's an ongoing process right now to completely change this system. And the design principles of that, if I have to point out, it's going to be a wallet which can hold your digital identity. It can hold your health related information. It holds your travel related information. And the part where consumer protection comes in is none of this is centrally stored anywhere. This is all stored on your own device. So even though it's an AI solution or an AI powered solution, it's stored on your own device, right? And it's decentralized. So it's very heartening to see that. It's very nice to see policies because policies are like the vision documents or guiding documents. What behavior is right, what behavior is not right. But in a new system that is being born, especially during pandemic time, when I see that as design principles being applied right in reality, it's very heartening. So that's one example, positive example for an AI optimist in India to think about.
That's just very happy. Thank you so much for sharing that. And on that note, we are ending the three themes that we wanted to cover. We'll have a round of concluding remarks from all our panelists. So, all of you will be given 2 minutes to share your concluding remarks, including your personal concerns and insights on the transformation of consumer protection in the coming days and key takeaways for us as consumers. So, we can begin with Mr. Shankar. So, please go ahead.
I think just knowing what your rights are, I'm just sticking particularly to the topic here. Just knowing what your rights are and exercising them would be a good starting point. I think we're tired of seeing businesses, putting up all these barriers for a simple thing as opening a bank account or making an insurance claim or proving your identity to get a mobile SIM. So I think you should be willing to walk away from businesses that are not worthy of your trust, that have not innovated and made it simpler, easier for you to obtain their services, and then give you enough trust to protect your information once you leave their store. And then finally, I think the new companies will be born just to help you protect your information. So we are sort of enabling people to simplify the onboarding process, prevent fraud and so on. But I think eventually there's a big gap where new companies would just come in and just fill the gap of just protecting your information. It doesn't matter who the tech layer is. It doesn't matter who the ID authorities, or it doesn't matter who the business is. Eventually, the gap of somebody just coming in and filling, saying that it doesn't matter who you share your data with, that we will ensure that it's always protected, and you will have the power to control it, erase it if you need it. So I'm really hopeful. I think we're going in the right direction, and I'm pretty sure that good things will happen.
Thank you, Mr. Thakkar. In the interest of time, we have around 4 minutes left. So, requesting the rest of the panelists to please limit your comments to around 30 seconds if you can. Mr. Vimal, you go next.
Yeah. So see, like a lot of innovation is happening, and innovation brings a lot of challenges also. And because consumer awareness is very very important from the consumer side, because a lot of consumers are still have a lot of mindset that if I share my digitally something, would that be safe? So I would personally feel a lot of awareness, consumer awareness about the newer technologies and things like that will help boosting this this overall digitization and consumer protection.
Thank you, Mr. Vimal. Mr. Tushar, if you could have your comments, concluding remarks, please.
So what I feel is a good thing that is happening is most of the that again are very, very right for consumer protection. That's one. Second is I feel no innovation is worth its salt or is not market ready if it is not protecting consumer or is putting consumers at risk. And I see, and it's I say it with a lot of optimism that whatever new product actually address. And final point is that all of us in this industry need to make the consumer more aware of the data protection that we do and the data that he gives us and how do we protect it. And that will lead to more traction on the platforms and innovations that are coming in, and it will remove the consumer fear.
Thank you, Mr. Tushar. Mr. Kedar, we would like to end with you. Please go ahead.
I will go back to my main point that it's about trust, and that trust has to be built on the organization side and on the consumer side. Today, when we see an organization like Tata stand the test of time, stand 100 years, and it's a name that we all trust with so many things in our life. I think that's exemplifying what maybe each and every one of us as businesses should be doing, because every consumer, we are in a country of more than 1 billion people, and expecting all of them to be educated and aware about this, is just not possible. So it is important that we all exemplify the behavior, so that when the next 100 million people come on the internet and they become aware about this, and they look back at the organizations that they have been transacting with, they should not feel like, that this organization was taking an advantage of me, right? They should be able to look back and feel happy about the organization they were dealing with as they become more and more aware. And I think that that's a very bright future for India, that we take responsibility of others when they are not able to take responsibility of themselves. And these next 100 million, 200 million consumers are what are going to build the businesses of the future also. So they will give back also.
On that very positive note, I would like to thank you all for your time today. We can all of us consumers can rest easy because we know that our privacy is in good hands, because the industry is not willing to compromise on consumer protection in any manner. So very happy to have had a chance to speak to all of you. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming here and making this possible. And really, it was very insightful insights what we had got, and it was a superb discussion. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.